I'm all set.
You are alive.
Top messages. Which one am I on? Which camera?
This
That one?
one.
Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Sewing. What are we calling this? Sewing and Story Time? Or Story Time with Brent?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's up to you.
We haven't.
It's your show.
It's not so much shenanigans anymore because it's mostly just sewing and stories. But
The Brent show.
the Brent Show? No, that's not going to carry at all. Nobody wants to see that. All right. First off, shop news. Check out our website for upcoming classes. I didn't write down what we've got coming up. We have had a lot of fabric and stuff come in the last couple days, so I'm going to show some of that off to you. Oh, first off, we've got to show you what Brenda got done. And if any of you have been in the shop while she was working on this, you will know how much fun she had with it. But this, we've got, I think, 2 or maybe 3 kits left of this. Of course, it's huge, and so I'm not going to be able to do the whole, it's upside down. But this is a quilt inspired by Jane Austen, and it's just kind of a nice classic look. We have kits of it available online. The center is pieced, so all this lattice work is pieced, but what's really nice about it is this border is printed, so it looks like you worked hard on it, but that is actually part of the panel. But this, we have kits of this. Brenda had a lot of fun putting it together, or at least the first half, and then she started getting sick of it, but that's a whole other story. So we have kits of that. This is going to get hung up. So that's been, we've had this for a little bit, but seeing it done is kind of nice. The other thing is we also had a bunch of stuff come in yesterday. This kit just came here 2 minutes ago. UPS just dropped this off. It's the Sweet Land of Liberty. Is that exciting or what? Not, here, I'll even open it because we're just having that much fun. It's basically, I'm not going to open it. I got too much other stuff to show you, and I don't want to fight with it. But it's going to be a panel, so that's a panel, and then you've got these piece borders. I have no idea what this kit is going for, like I said. Yeah. We just opened the box, and we're like, let's put this on the show. This just came in, like I said, not 5 minutes ago. So there's that. The other one that I'm super excited about is this. I have no idea why I'm excited about this panel. I think it glows in the dark. I could be wrong, though. But that is a great panel. You cut it up and you make a giant skeleton stuffy thing. And the directions down here, there's directions here what to do, and it calls for a 3-foot dowel. So I have to make this because I'm not really sure what you would do with that. I think you probably use it to hold him up straight, but I don't know. I kind of want him to be floppy. But there's that panel that came in. The new Janet Recker Frisch, if you're a fan of her stuff like I am. I think this one's called Queen of Hearts, but you know, it's kind of got a Halloween theme, and you know how I feel about Halloween fabric. So there's that. And then, me and Eddie I was loving this. Is this not the best fabric ever? Go read it on that. This is the latest from Ruby Star Society for Moda. Is that not awesome? Are these cats not adorable? So this is regular cotton, but we also got these same cats a little bit bigger on this canvasy stuff. A little bit heavier as the canvas, so you can make a really cool tote bag if you really love these cats like I do. So that's on my to-do list, is to turn this into a bag, because that's what this stuff is for, and those are just the best cats ever. And with that, we have the coordinates. I'm not sure how I feel about the colorway on that, but that coordinates with the cats, obviously. And then this one here is going to be popular with the literary people amongst us. It's library books. So anyway,
Cat in there.
what's that?
There's a little cat.
There's a little cat and there's a mouse in there too.
Whoa.
So yes, that's what's new and just came in. And why do you have the microphone tilted toward the machine, Eddie?
Oh, I didn't move it.
All right. So that's shop news. That's all the new stuff that came in. And there's other stuff coming in all the time. Also, tonight at 8 o'clock on Facebook, we're going to be doing a Facebook Live sale. If you remember from our early days of playing with video cameras in the interwebs, some of our earlier work was Facebook Live sales, and we're going to kind of go back to our roots. I think we have some live music planned, Eddie, is that correct? We're going to have some mood music and stuff for sale, because we're like spring cleaning, and we're like, what do we do with all this stuff? I'm like, let's have a sale. So that's going to be fun. That's going to be tonight at 8 o'clock. It's on Facebook. The reason we do it on Facebook is because it makes it a whole lot easier for messaging and stuff. Because you know you get trolls on YouTube that would tune in. It's a lot hard. It's a lot easier to keep track of stuff on Facebook. So we got that going on. Yes. So see, John likes the cat canvas. He's got good taste. So I guess let's get into it. Oh, let's move this out of the way.
Is there any classes?
Classes. I'll check the calendar. I don't think we got anything, Brandy, new on the calendar yet. I got to add a couple things. Somebody had sent me a link to a quilted chair that looks very interesting. Keep an eye out for that. That's probably going to be mid to late May if we do that. But we do have Intro to Embroidery is this Saturday, and we have Luminaires Owners Club, which is going to be tomorrow. That for sure is on the calendar. Sign up for that if you're interested. And we may be starting also doing Thursday evening sews again. There's been some interest expressed in that, so we may start doing that again. If you remember the good old days when the Baxter used to, the OG Baxter used to hang out on Thursdays after work, and we might start doing that again. Also, we have a special guest for next week's show. Very excited. He was supposed to be here today, but his car broke down, so he planned it for next week. And we're going to have a real fun show with that, just to get you all excited about that. That's coming up next week. So I guess without further ado, I guess we get into it, or am I forgetting anything, Eddie?
I don't think you're forgetting anything.
You're not forgetting everything? Okay. So what are we going to okay. What we're going to do today is, if you all remember, we started this last week. Isn't that wonderful? And I was going to finish it, but then I was like, you know what? I don't want to finish it. Let's do it here. Again, like I said, my plan is I was going to have some help today, and he was going to sew with me. But like I said, he had car issues, and since he has an affinity to mode fabric, I was going to finish using this. But so these are the blocks we made last week, and I did do some work on this, believe it or not. I actually got all of our blocks sewn together because this is all from the layer cake. It has a bunch of these blocks in it. So what I wanted to do today is kind of finish this out a little bit, so you can kind of see the direction that we're going with it. So if you remember, all we did is we took the squares and either sewed one side, or either sewed two sides or all four sides, and then depending how we sew them, then we would cut them to get our. You want to do an overhead shot for this? We would cut them to either get these 4 patches or to get Eddie decided on a chevron, which I don't know why I gave him that choice, but it's all right. We're going to make it work. I have an idea for the quilt. So all we're going to do, let me just iron this flat real quick. And I just want to show you the next step in our funness is... So to make this work, to make a quilt out of this, what I'm going to do now is measure this, which I've already measured it, so I'm kind of ahead of the game, but I'm going to show you where the measurement's at. So if I drop this on my table, I can see that this measures out roughly 13 inches square. This measures out roughly 9.5 inches square. So to make this 13 inches, I subtract 9.5 from 13, and what's that give me, Eddie?
3.5.
3.5. Okay. But we have 2 sides, not one. So what's half of 3.5?
1.75.
1.75. Right? But we have to figure in a 1/4 inch seam. Oh, I did the math wrong. Oh well, we're going to do it this way anyway. Because I should have done 2 1/4 strips or 2.5. We've got to add 1 3/4 inches to each side of these to make these the same as that. I went ahead and cut 2.5 inch strips, but the problem with that is that doesn't account for 2 inch strips. That doesn't account for that. We'll trim it all down and make it all work. I'm not worried about it. That's just the nature of the beast. So what I'm going to do now is sew that to that, and I'll show you what we're going to be doing. So, as you know, as the structure that I've decided on for a format, because I find it kind of entertaining, is oh no, where did I put my sheet at, Eddie? I had a cheat sheet for story today. Where did I put it? I had like lots of notes. All right.
It's not under the full mat, is it?
It's not. No, that's the Sandino. That was last week's.
Okay.
I had it right here. Anyway, we were going to talk about Cleopatra because apparently she's in the news again. Can you check on the printer for me? while I sew and which one am I on?
One. Do you want it on?
No, that one's fine. I
on
can.
the machine? Are you sewing?
I'm gonna sew, yeah, but is that gonna be boring? Can you do an inset with it on a machine?
No.
No. Okay, whatever. Whatever. We're fine.
Alright.
Just go look on the printer real quick and get back here. Anyway.
Oh, I just set down the camera.
Oh my! Wow, this is all sorts of. We're all sorts of special today. So what we're gonna do is, I was gonna talk about Cleopatra because apparently she's in the news again because there's a new docu-series coming out, and I fell down a rabbit hole. And it was a very interesting rabbit hole. And I thought, that's what we're going to talk about today. So apparently the drama is, because it's being marketed as this docu-series on Netflix, everybody is losing their mind because apparently they got Cleopatra is being portrayed as a black person, as a black person, because she's an African queen. And everybody's losing their mind, or not everybody, certain segments of the population are losing their mind over this. And the complaint is understandable. Can't find it? It's right there?
That's thread.
That's thread. It might be over there somewhere.
You keep talking.
I'll keep talking. So, what was interesting is, so I listen to a lot of weird podcasts. And one of the podcasts I'm listening to, they were like talking about how they lost their minds because some people were losing their minds because of this inaccurate portrayal of Cleopatra, which, and this podcast, by the way, is European, so that's what kind of made it funny, because they were kind of upset because it's being portrayed as a docu-series, which would indicate a documentary, i.e. educational, so it should be factual. And the Macedonians were having a fit over this. Do you know who the Macedonians are, Eddie?
They're from Macedonia?
Macedonia, yes, but where's Macedonia?
In the other Europe and Asia, like that side
It's
of
a
the world?
little bit north of Greece. If you look at a map, you find Greece on a map, go a little bit north, there's Macedonia. Macedonians are losing their mind over this. Do you know why the Macedonians are losing their mind over the fact that this docuseries has Cleopatra portrayed as a black woman?
Are Macedonians not black?
Yes. But Cleopatra is the queen of Egypt, not Macedonia. So why would they have an opinion on this?
Is she Macedonian?
Yes, she is actually Macedonian. So this led me down. Like I said, so I'm listening to this podcast, and it just sent me down a rabbit hole. And they're like, she's clearly not African. Now, let's talk about the geography of Africa for a minute. Because what I find interesting, one of the things that is fascinating to me, is the world we live in has kind of forgotten that there was a world before we came into it. Like history just didn't start yesterday, and geography just didn't come into existence 5 minutes ago. World's been here for a while. Things have existed for a while. And just because we have our opinion on things doesn't necessarily make them accurate. So one of the things that's interesting right now about all this is that this idea is Cleopatra was an African queen, so therefore she must be black. But I don't want to make this a racial thing. One of the great quotes I found when I was reading about all this is that, how did it go? See, I wish I had my paper because I actually had it on there. It said that, it was interesting because it said that black and white is not an ethnic nor cultural group. That is a modern invention of the Americas, which it was very interesting that they said that, because one of the things that's fascinating if you start studying culture and history is that this idea of black versus white is just something we made up as Americans. And because we're American and we just think that everybody is like us, we just kind of exported that to the world. When if you start looking at it, and the point they were making is, and then they also said, just like Macedonians, Greeks, and Egyptians is way different in its modern context than it is in what it meant anciently. But one of the things they were getting into is the fact that nobody cares. Back in the day, black, white, nobody cared. And so, you ever hear the term Black Africa, Eddie?
No.
See, when I ran across this, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get canceled for saying things. But Black Africa is actually a term for Africa, for sub-Saharan Africa. Because if you look at a map of Africa, what you have is the Sahara Desert. So you start in the north, which is basically right along the coast of the Mediterranean. And then from the coast of the Mediterranean, it goes to the Sahara Desert, which we all know about the Saharan, right? Like the giant desert. And then on the other side of the Sahara, know what you get? The Congo Basin. So if you're from southern Africa, and we're talking even today, but imagine in ancient times, if you're in southern Africa, the odds that you're going to make it to northern Africa through the Congo Basin and then the Sahara to get to the Mediterranean, those people are way different than the people that are in southern Africa. So there is a term called Black Africa, which refers to Africa south of the Sahara because it is actually an ethnically and culturally different set of people. So Egypt is not part of Black Africa. And that also brings us to, you ever hear Dark Africa?
Is that different from Black Africa?
It's different than Black Africa, which was interesting because that used to be how, that was a, oh gosh, who was it? I think the Europeans came up for that when they were like, during their time of exploration and settlement, during the imperialistic stuff. The Dark Africa, the Dark Continent. Do you know why they called it the Dark Continent?
No.
Had nothing to do with the Black Africa part. It was dark because it was unexplored. The Congo was considered the Dark Continent because of the fact that it was unexplored and they didn't know what was there. That was fun. So Africa's got a really rich history. Africa's a very interesting continent with a very rich history. And so all this drama about Cleopatra was interesting. So I fell down this rabbit hole. And if you want to fall down an even bigger rabbit hole, again, like I said, you start getting into all this weird racial, cultural stuff, and then you realize that there's actually an argument happening right now between the Greeks and the Macedonians. Did you know this, Eddie? Because they're losing their mind because, oh, Cleopatra's not black, she's Macedonian. But then they're like, but she's not Macedonian, she's Greek. Because apparently the Greeks and the Macedonians and the Greeks had a falling out. Oh gosh, I believe it was 1940s or some sort of civil war, but apparently it's been brewing for a while. But the Macedonians are not considered Greek. But this whole problem goes all the way back to, here's where our story starts. And yes, Elizabeth Taylor probably was a very accurate depiction of, let's start in the beginning for Cleopatra. A lot of this goes all the way back to Alexander the Great. Have you heard that name, Eddie?
Yeah.
Who is he? There's a movie. Have you seen the movie?
No. I've heard the name.
Well, Alexander the Great was the... Alexander the Great...
Is he the elephant guy, or is that a different guy?
I think he was the elephant guy. I didn't fall down the Alexander the Great rabbit hole for this one because there's so much more to get into. But basically, Alexander the Great conquered the known world at the time. He kind of, some people say he was kind of what ushered in the modern era. So basically, he was a king of Macedonia at the time. And of course, the Greeks like to claim him as Macedonian Greek because at the time, Macedonia was a northern Greek kingdom, and King Philip, who was Alex's dad, was Macedonian. So they say that Alexander the Great was Macedonian, but it's pretty well documented. I think he was a Aristotle's student, and we all know that Aristotle is a great Greek philosopher. So there is some overlap there. It's not disputed that Philip was the king of Macedonia. The disputations come is the heritage. Was he of Greek or Macedonian descent? Most people say Macedonia, but then if you get into the Greek versus Macedonia propaganda, both sides want to claim him. So that's where this whole thing starts, is Alexander the Great. He gets a bug in his bonnet. He's like, I'm the king of Macedonia, but that's not enough. I want to be king of the world. So, Eddie, what do you do when you want to be king of the world?
You start taking places and stuff.
Yeah. Go get a couple elephants and go take over the world, right?
Yeah. Learn that Hannibal's the one with the...
Yeah, Hannibal's one. Yes. The elephants. That's right. So anyway, Alexander wants to be king of the world. So what's he do? He goes out and conquers the known world. Now, which is fast again. when you look at, the known world, what is the known world at that time? It's basically the Mediterranean and what is present-day Iran. That's what he did. He went and took over all the coast of the Mediterranean and then marched across Iran, declared himself king, went home and retired. So that's Alexander the Great. And then, what happens to the king, Eddie?
He dies.
Kings will always die. Now, what does a smart king do?
He retires.
I think I did this backwards.
Gives
He at least appoints an heir, right?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, Alexander did not leave an heir. And it's up in the air whether he actually was he died of natural causes or if he was poisoned. Apparently, back in the day, it was very common to poison the king. So it is thought that he may have been poisoned, but I think it was about 2 weeks from when he got sick to when he died. Maybe it was COVID. So they don't think it was poison because poisons back in the day were not that sophisticated, and they think he would have died a lot sooner. So anyway, that was a side note. So he dies, and the rumor is on his deathbed when they're like, because he's dying, he's sick and he's dying, like, oh, I'm dying. And they're like, who should be your heir? You know what his reply was?
Cleopatra?
No.
Okay.
No, because this is a story, and what I love about these stories is, this is like I said, the Greek Empire where they like wrote stuff, and I love that all we have from history is what other people wrote. So sometimes I really think that what we're getting is like this really, the good parts version or the version made up, because
John just said Alexander was gay.
That is a possibility. That's a whole another can of worms. Way different connotations in ancient culture. Yeah, that's a whole nother. We won't go into that. We're probably in enough trouble for talking about race. We shouldn't get into the other stuff too. But so no, Alexander on his deathbed, when they're like, "Oh, Alex, who's going to be your successor? Who's your heir? Tell us, oh mighty king!" And he whispers out, "The strongest." Who should be the heir? The strongest one. Now, okay, so you can tell, so that somebody was just made that up. Somebody's like, oh, we got to tell a good story. He didn't have an heir, so he just said the strongest one. And apparently, if translated, it's the one to say the strongest is also fairly similar to say Kratos. So some people are saying he might have said Cratius or something like that. Whoever that dude was, one of his generals. But anyway, the story is he said the strongest one. So what's that lead to, Eddie? If the king is dead and his parting words were the strongest shall inherit the kingdom.
The first ever strongest man.
Yep, they had a rock lifting competition and a bunch of fat Scandinavian guys came down and picked up rocks and they no.
That is today, actually.
That is today. So no, what happened is then there was a revolution. Everybody starts fighting over it, and basically, when the dust settles, the great kingdom of Alexander, the conquered known world, which was unified under Alexander the Great, broke up into 4 different kingdoms. Each kingdom ruled by a different, I think it was 4. Each kingdom ruled by a different kind of general or somebody vying for the crown. Most of them tended to be military leaders, because this is back in the day when your awesomeness as a human being was. Your awesomeness and power in society was based on your military prowess, and so most of the it got broken up. I want to say it was 4 kingdoms, but that's not important to the story. The important part of the story is one of his generals, Ptolemy of Macedonia. That's Ptolemy with a P. Do you know how to spell Ptolemy with a P, Eddie? Ptolemy with a P.
P-T?
Yeah, P-T, yeah. When I first saw it, I'm like, Ptolemy? No, it's Ptolemy. The P is silent, apparently. Ptolemy takes over, Ptolemy gets the Egyptian kingdom, Cyprus, and a few others. So that's where our story with, where Cleopatra comes in. And I wish I had my notes. I don't have my notes, so I'm flying off the cuff. So if I'm wrong, internet, correct me. Here's where it gets kind of stupid if you start looking about trying to figure this stuff out, follow the story. One of the problems you run into is that I think my tension's off a little bit. Cleopatra is actually a title. Did you know that?
I did not.
No, yeah, see? Learn something every day. Cleopatra was not her name. I don't even remember what her name is. Cleopatra is actually a title. You know what the title means?
It's like a queen.
It's like the glory of her father or something like that, which I found really fascinating because, you know, you see all these stories about, you know, women's power and all that. And one of the greatest ancient queens, her name actually means glory to dad. Like, not even like all powerful woman. No, it's your dad was awesome. That's what your name means. Your dad's awesome. Anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. Like I said, I love looking at ancient stuff and then comparing it with our modern eyes. It makes me laugh. So anyway, that's what Cleopatra means. And she was actually Cleopatra the Seventh? I can't, like I said, so I'm starting to read all this. And so the problem you have when you start looking at this whole story is all of the kings are named Ptolemy. So it's either Ptolemy the First, Ptolemy the Second, Ptolemy the Third. And there's a point in Cleopatra's life where she has a fight with Ptolemy the 14th or the 13th. And then the historical record shows that Ptolemy the 13th, no, Ptolemy the 12th, she has it falling out with, and then Ptolemy the 13th gets in bed with the Romans. Anyway, it's Ptolemy's and Cleopatra's and Bernice's. Bernice is another one. Bernice is another title that they give to the queens in the Ptolemaic dynasty. And that there's a funny story about one of the Bernices, like she's going to take over, and everybody back in Greece is kind of upset about the idea of the single woman running the Ptolemaic Empire. So she's like, okay, I'll marry my cousin. So she marries her cousin. What's her cousin do?
Change his name to Ptolemy.
Change his name to Ptolemy, and then what's he do 2 days later?
Takes it over.
Kills Bernice. Becomes the sole ruler 2 or 3 days later. Anyway, so...
It's like Goodfellas at the wedding, where everyone's named Polly or Peter.
Exactly, and they're probably all trying to kill each other, right?
No, they're...
Okay, so here, do an overhead shot. See how this looks? I'm going to have to trim this. I'll have to trim the chevron down, but we're not going to lose our points because of the shape of the chevron, really. And what do you think? Is that gonna make a good quilt? Maybe? Maybe? Okay. Let's make a couple more squares. Should we frame out another block or make some more squares? What do you think? Let's trim this down and then we'll sew it together. No, we don't have enough for a roulette. Let's frame that out. All right, so. So anyway, where do we leave off? The Ptolemaic Empire. The emperor, one of the emperors, one of the generals from Alexander's army decides that he takes over the Egyptian and a few other territories, and that becomes the Ptolemaic dynasty. Now, that's 250 years before Cleopatra. Okay? So, the Ptolemaic dynasty starts 250 years before Cleopatra. Cleopatra is actually the last of the Ptolemaic Empire. And I think she might have had something to do with the downfall, if you look at how things played out between her and Mark Antony. And Mark's wife, Octavia, yeah, it didn't play out well. But to understand that there is no doubt in anybody's mind that Cleopatra was not Egyptian. Not even close. Because, keep in mind, she's the last of a 250-year dynasty, the Ptolemaic Empire. And she is actually the first of all the Ptolemaic rulers, the first of any of the Ptolemies and the first of any of the Cleopatras or the Bernices to actually learn to speak Egyptian. Could you imagine that, Eddie? 250 years. You're being ruled, let's say the Canadians took us over, okay? Canadians march south. No, better yet, the Mexicans march north and take over. And they take over. And for 250 years, we are ruled by Mexicans that never bothered to learn English. They're just like, we're in charge. Screw English. We're just going to talk in Spanish the whole time. Think about that for a second. That's kind of would be irritating if I was like under that rule, right? Like, really? You don't have enough respect for the people to learn language? But again, different times. So she was the first to actually learn Egyptian. So that tells you, that her family was definitely not Egyptian because none of them spoke Egyptian. In fact, do you know what? So her dad, Ptolemy, one of the Ptolemies, I can't even remember which Ptolemy because I don't have my notes, but he was one of the Ptolemies. Her dad gets sent into exile because, mind you, the Egyptians have been ruled by this dynasty for 200 years by this point, by people that haven't even bothered to learn Egyptian, but no problem because the priest came out and blessed them and said, you're now a pharaoh. That was part of it. That's all. And what do you think it is that pissed off the Egyptians enough that they're like, you know what, this Ptolemy dude's got to go? My tension's off a little bit. I mean, there's like I said, we're 200 years into the dynastic reign, and like I said, Cleopatra was the first one to learn Egyptian, so it kind of gives you an idea how much they really care about the average Egyptian. What do you think finally pisses them off enough that they're like, Ptolemy, you got to go, and your sister and your daughter's taking over, and we'll get into that in a minute.
I don't know.
Okay. He was basically he was a partier, from what I understand. So he was just racking up debt. So imagine it. So if you were looking at like today's in current, it'd be like him. His national debt got out of control. So he was borrowing money from the Romans, and this is important. He borrowed a lot of money from the Romans, and that kind of ticked off the Egyptians. But what made him even madder, and like I said, I'm reading this. I'm trying to figure out the rationale behind this. And I'm not really sure why, but Ptolemy's brother, Ptolemy, the other Ptolemy, because if you read the stuff, it's like Ptolemy of Cyprus versus Ptolemy of Egypt. So Ptolemy of Cyprus is Ptolemy of Egypt's brother. And apparently he has extracurricular activities of his own, which involve piracy. And by this time, the Romans are kind of the new kids on the block, kind of keeping things under control, and Ptolemy of Egypt is accused of piracy, and so he commits suicide before he can be brought back to Rome. And this is common, actually, in this whole story. Apparently, it was customary that if you were some sort of leader, and what am I doing here? Some sort of leader, and you get caught with your hand in the cookie jar, or you lose a battle or whatever, they bring you back to Rome, march you through the streets, and I guess they don't treat you very nicely. It's like that scene in Game of Thrones when they march seriously through the streets, something like that. Anyway, so Ptolemy of Cyprus decides that he's not going to go back to Rome, commit suicide, because he's not going to go back to Rome because he's been found to be a pirate, the pirate of Cyprus. Piracy apparently is not condoned among the fledgling Roman Empire. So he commits suicide. Now, Ptolemy of Egypt, who's his brother, kind of keeps his mouth shut about the whole situation, thinking, he owes a bunch of money to Rome, and what really is the upside to speaking out about his brother? He's already dead. And apparently this pissed off the Egyptians enough that they exiled him. And so his daughter, Bernice, took over. Which Bernice, I can't remember, but it was one of the Bernices takes over. And he is exiled to Rome. What is going on with this? Well, he doesn't exile. He runs back to Rome. And with him at this time, he's in Rome. With him at this time is Cleopatra. She's about 11. So he goes into exile with Cleopatra's at 11. Now, to really understand the dynamics of this situation, keep in mind that Ptolemy, Cleopatra's dad, has just been exiled to Rome. And guess who took over? Guess who kind of led the revolution? Ptolemy's other daughter, Bernice. So there's like this power play, and so daughter's like, "Hey, Dad, you screwed up. Be gone." She leads. She kind of plays it and gets him kicked out. So he's in Rome. Have I lost anybody yet? Everybody bored to death? Machine's broken here. So that's Cleopatra's early life. At the age of 11, she's exiled to Rome with her dad. But here's where it gets interesting. And so, like I said, he was a partier, owed a lot of money. He was financed it through a dude named Gaius, who was apparently some fat cat from Rome. So he owed Gaius a lot of money. And Gaius is like, dude, you better get your kingdom back so you can pay your bills. And he's like, I can't do it. And so they go to the Roman court and try and convince the government to give him a couple legions to go back and take over Egypt. And they're like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. We're happy with Bernice right now, so we're not going to fund that war. That's a bad idea. And Gaius is like, I think it was Gaius or Gallio or something like that, some Roman name. Gaius is like, well, dude, you owe me a lot of money. So he goes out and funds his own army and gives it to Ptolemy to march back on Egypt, because Gaius figures he's not getting paid if Ptolemy's not sitting on the throne. So he actually pays, funds the army to get Gaius back to march on Egypt. And as a little side note of trivia, one of the young cavalry officers in the army that marched with Ptolemy to take back Egypt from his daughter Bernice, one of the young cavalry officers, guess what his name is, Eddie? It's one of your mother's favorite musical artists.
Pitbull?
No, but that would have been awesome.
Daddy Yankee?
No, Mark Anthony.
Oh, that's
Yes,
very, yeah, that makes sense.
yes, and Mark. We'll run back into Mark Anthony later. But according to the legend, the movie that the Greeks were writing about this at the time, Mark Anthony said that it was on that military campaign that he fell in love with Cleopatra, who was 14 years old at the time. So that's kind of creepy of Mark Anthony. But anyway, but Black Agnes was 12 too, so you know how that goes. So they go march back and take back Egypt from Alexandria. Now, mind you, this is all happening in Alexandria. And they take back Alexandria from Bernice, and then they get back there, and Ptolemy's kind of an old guy, because you got to remember, I didn't get into this, but Bernice is Cleopatra's half-sister from a first marriage, I guess, if we'll use the word marriage loosely. What is going on here, Eddie? Why is that not pulling? Oh, because I'm not tight enough here. It's not the bobbin, it's the top. Anyway, we'll move on. If the tension's off when we get this done, we'll just blame it on the machine, right? So Bernice is actually Cleopatra's half-sister. But this is important because by the time they march back on, Ptolemy gets his throne back. He's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to name this daughter the one that came back to Egypt with me, not the one that took the throne from me. She gets to be my co-ruler. And that's when Cleopatra kind of takes over, doesn't take over, but you start to see her as the ruler of Egypt, is after she marches back with Ptolemy. Ptolemy dies, I think a year or two later, very soon after that happens. And so then we have the story of Cleopatra. So that's how but think about that for a second. To really understand what's going on at this time, Ptolemy's kid, Bernice, is the one that kind of led the revolution to get him exiled to Rome. And it's her. And so Cleopatra marches back on Egypt with Roman backing to dethrone her half-sister. Now, this is a good time to bring up the point that the Ptolemaic Empire is super famous for inbreeding to make sure that the power stays within the family. And that's the other reason that most people, there's really no historical doubt at all that Cleopatra was definitely not of Egyptian or African descent, because she was part of a dynasty that was known for inbreeding. And that also, I think, is why the whole Ptolemy versus, you start looking Ptolemy this, Ptolemy that, you don't know if they're brothers or cousins or fathers. It's just bizarre. So she takes over. And then she is, after the king dies, she's supposed to take over with Ptolemy the 12th, I think it is. Anyway, so Ptolemy dies, and then Ptolemy Jr. comes on the scene, and he's like, I want my piece of that pie. And Cleo is like, yeah, that ain't happening, bro. And so that's better. Okay. So Cleo wants all the pie for herself. So she's like, yeah, that's not happening. And now keep in mind, by this time, Alexander, this is 250 years after Alexander the Great. The heyday of the Greek Empire is pretty much over. And who's on the scene after the Greeks, Eddie? The Romans. seasons. Yes. So Caesar comes into play here, and the other thing that's fascinating to me when you start reading all this is like, you know how you have like sports seasons, like you got football season, basketball season, baseball season. What did we do before we had sports to keep us occupied, Eddie?
Is there a war season?
Yeah, basically, there's a war season. And I was like reading this thing about the Assyrians, which made me laugh, and they're talking about it because Assyria is like the first great empire, and they're all farmers. But what would happen in Assyria back in the day, the farmers would plant all their crops, and we got to wait for the crops to grow. So what do you do when you wait for the crops to grow?
You
Go pick up a spear and let's go raid the next village over. So their actual war season was while they were waiting for the crops to grow, and then they would stop warring, go back, harvest their crops, call it a year, and then wait till next spring to go war again. So that's why you'll see the fighting season. Even now, you kind of see references to it in modern army, like the spring is the fighting season. So back in the day, even the Romans, fighting season, which is interesting. But anyway, complete side note. So Cleopatra disses her brother and says, yeah, no. Because it was the... now, mind you, like I said, this is 250 years into the Ptolemaic dynasty, And it's still the custom. I think this has... I didn't get into Egyptian dynastic rule, but there's a huge religious element to the Egyptian. Like, Pharaoh is actually like a god. And one of the very common things that the Ptolemaic dynasty did to maintain their power and influence in Egypt is brothers and sisters would marry and rule together. There was always a ruler and a co-ruler, and they were usually married. I don't know the level of how that marriage went, but by this time, even the Greeks are kind of like, yeah, marrying your brother's kind of gross. So Cleopatra's like, yeah, that's not happening. Disses him, and she takes over, and she's running Egypt by herself. And of course, like I said, the Romans are on the scene, and so imagine, Ptolemy, the guy that got dissed, he's like, I'm going to go talk to some of my Roman friends, and he puts together an army and starts a revolution, blah, 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 blah. But what's interesting is, how did that work out? See, I wish I had my notes. There was going to be there was a Roman guy coming to exert his control over Egypt. Because by this time, what's going on is, sure, Egypt kind of has its own thing going on. It's its own empire. But it's kind of a state of Rome at this point. They let Egypt be because Egypt's paying its taxes. But they would have no problem marching in some legions and just taking over and declaring it theirs if they felt like it. So Egypt kind of has to pay attention and do their thing. And so Ptolemy puts together an army and decides to have a revolution. And one of the ally was the ally of Cleo? I think it was anyway, there was another Roman dude that was not friends with Caesar. And he was, doing some stuff in Egypt. And so Ptolemy's like, I'm going to make friends with Caesar by killing this other Roman guy. So he ambushes him on the road, kills him, sends his head to Caesar. How do you think Caesar felt about that, Eddie? Was he like, thank you so much for killing my rival?
probably not.
He was actually kind of pissed. He's like, what are you doing killing Romans? That ain't right. So he wasn't mad enough to kill the guy, but he was very perturbed by this. So they kind of backfired. And so, because I think the play was he's going to kill this guy, give it to Caesar. Caesar's going to be like, oh, dude, thank you so much. You can have Egypt now. I think that's how that's how Ptolemy thought it was going to play out. No such luck. But in this time, what's her face? Cleo is exiled, not in Alexandria, where is she at Thebes? I don't know. She's exiled. She's not back at the palace. But Caesar shows up at the palace, and he's like, I'm gonna bring some order to this chaos because we're Romans. This doesn't stand. And so he's trying to figure out who's going to rule Egypt. And so Ptolemy's there, gonna try and woo him. And Cleopatra was just gonna send over one of her servants to make the case for Cleopatra. And she's like, but rumor is, this is a rumor back in the day, Eddie. Rumor is that Caesar liked his royal women. He had a thing for royal women. So Cleo's thinking, she's like, oh, I'm a royal woman. And by all accounts, she was kind of good looking. She's like, let me go make the case in person. And so there's two accounts of it. One of them she was smuggled in. The other one she just marched in looking kind of like a Instagram model, because it's noted in one of them that she was not dressed appropriately for the court, or slightly scabbed. But anyway, she goes in, works her magic that Cleopatra is actually famous for, apparently. And after reading all this history, I totally understand why. Totally undermines what her brother's doing. He gets a little irritated. This gets even better. So they're at the palace in Alexandria. There's all this other stuff going on. There's a siege laid to the palace, and oh my gosh, Caesar and Cleopatra are stuck in the castle together. What will they ever do? Guess who was born after the siege, Eddie?
I don't know.
If you had to name a kid that was from Egypt and Rome, and you wanted him to rule, what would you name him?
Is it King Tut? That's the only Egyptian
No,
I know.
no. I think his official name was Caesarion or something like that. But Cleopatra was often heard calling him Pharaoh Caesar. Her little son, Pharaoh Caesar. And Caesar's like, ain't my kid. And I don't know, kid with Cleopatra. And I was like, dude, you just spent the whole castle siege with her? That's kind of a hard claim to make. So I think at one point he does eventually claim the kid as his. But yeah, Pharaoh Caesar is the child of Caesar and Cleopatra, was the first kid. And she kind of used that to her advantage to maintain the power of Egypt. Maintain her stature as the queen of Egypt. What happened to Caesar, though, Eddie?
He got stabbed.
Yeah, he actually... See, Caesar's also kind of like Ptolemy and Cleopatra. It's like a title. But I think we are talking about the Caesar that got stabbed. Because, yeah, Caesar got assassinated. And Caesar's assassinated, so who takes up the mantle to go take care of Caesar's assassins?
Augustus?
No.
Mark Antony?
Yes, our young cavalryman, ever so faithful to his commander Caesar's, like, we're going to go get those SOBs that did this. And he launches a campaign to go do it. And he's like, oh, I need some men. Let me talk to that Egyptian hottie, get her to send me some men. And guess what? Cleopatra's like, yeah, no. He sends for her like 2 or 3 times, and she's like, dude, I got no interest. And then he proceeds to do his campaign, and eventually he kind of shows that he's going to be in charge. And then all of a sudden Cleopatra's like, oh, Mark Antony, you're the most handsomest man I ever met. And invites him over to Egypt, and promptly has a couple kids with him. A couple twins. Helios and... Anyway. So, but see, this is where she kind of messes the whole. Oh wait, we can't trim this down because we're going to lose the tip off of that, but we can take it off the bottom. Okay. So then what happens is Mark Antony spends a little bit of time over in Egypt with Cleopatra, then goes back to Rome, where he then gets married to Octavia. All right. So how do you think Cleo felt about that?
Not good.
Not good, because she just, had a couple kids with him, because she had this whole plan to have kids with Mark Antony, and that's how she's going to save Egypt by making Egypt's kings sons of Rome or whatever. So he marries Octavia, but like I said, the story goes that when he was the cavalryman, he fell in love with Cleo. So she ends up in Rome doing something, and apparently she's a bit of a home wrecker, and her and Mark Antony, yeah, get it on, even though he's still married to Octavia. And some in the Senate saw this as very scandalous at the time. How could he do such a thing? There's like a whole thing about it. They're very upset by this. And then to make matters worse, okay, so remember at this point, Egypt is a state of Rome, right? So, I can't think. I'm not even going to use names because then we're going to get all political. But imagine that you've got your state senator. So imagine, Eddie, you're a handsome young man, and you decide that you're going to go to the United States Senate and petition to enhance the boundaries of New Hampshire. You're gonna go up to Canada, and you go up to the Canadian Parliament, and you're gonna be like, dudes and dudettes, I, as a handsome man from New Hampshire, think that I deserve more land north of the Canadian border. What do you think the Canadians would say to you?
Go away.
Go away. You're crazy. Why would we do that? We own this land. Why are we going to give it to you, some foreign crazy man? Now imagine that you make googly eyes at the Prime Minister, who happens to be a nice woman. For this story, she's a nice, attractive woman. And she's like, yes, handsome young Ed, I will be happy to give you the province of Montreal to annex to your state of New Hampshire. How do you think that would...
Montreal.
Yeah, like the whole of Montreal. Because you were just like, hey, look at me, I'm handsome, right? How do you think that would play out with the Canadians?
I don't think people would like that.
You think the Canadians would be like, "Wow, thank you so much for doing that for us. We always wanted to be part. We always wanted New Hampshire to be part of our." That's pretty much what happened. So Cleopatra goes to Rome, makes eyes at Mark Antony, and he's like, "Oh, of course we'll give you back Cyprus. We'll give you." I think she was even going to take Herod. Like the Bible story would be so much different if it turned out the way Mark Antony wanted it to. Because he was going to give Judea to Cleo, and I don't think Cleo had it in for babies, so she wouldn't have killed all the babies, and the Jesus story wouldn't be the same, because Mary and Joseph wouldn't have to flee to Egypt, because Judea would be in Egypt because it was owned by Cleo, because Mark was like, ooh, she's a hottie, let's give her Judea. So that's what happens when she goes to Rome. And that leads to some disaffection of the Romans with Mark Antony because, well, you can imagine they're like, why do we want him leading things if he's obviously, got the hots for this foreign queen. So that leads to a whole bunch of stuff, which eventually leads to Now, see, this is also where the story gets confusing because Mark Antony's wife's name is Octavia. And his main rival is Octavian. So I was like all confused. I'm like, so Octavia, his ex-wife, gets a fleet together to go take out Mark Antony? Could you imagine that? That's how it kind of reads. Like his ex-wife got mad, got a fleet together, and decides that she's going to exact retribution on her ex-husband. But nope. Ptolemy beheaded Roman Pompey. Yes. Yes, Pompey is part of this too. So Octavian gets a fleet, blah 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 blah. They end up back in Alexandria under siege. So Cleopatra's like, oh no, I'm gonna. She pretends to commit suicide so that I guess to leave her alone or so Mark. I don't know. It's like the whole Romeo and Juliet thing. So part of me thinks that it might have just been invented by the Greeks to make the story better. But basically, there's news of Cleopatra's suicide, so Mark Antony stabs himself in the gut because, I don't want to. He's like, I don't want to live life without my Cleo, and so he stabbed himself in the gut, kills himself, but she dies. And this is how I wonder, like, what history's based on. Okay, so the story is there's a rumor that Cleopatra kills herself. Mark Antony gets word of the rumor, stabs himself in the stomach because he's committing suicide because his lover. I don't know. But it's a stomach wound, so he doesn't die right away. So he has time to get back to the palace and die in Cleo's arms. Is that believable, Eddie? I'm not saying. That's the historical record. So when you want to have a docudrama where you're going to change the race of the main character, I don't think I really care. Because, this is the historical record we're dealing with. That this romanticized idea, I stab myself in the stomach, but I'm going to run back to the palace in time to die in my lover's arms. Bizarre. But anyway, that's what happened. And then he is embalmed and buried and with all honors and blah, 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 blah. And then Octavian rolls into Alexandria at this point. He captures Cleopatra, and she's like, if you send me, I'm not going back to Rome. And you're not going to march me through the streets. And he's like, no, we're not going to do that. And she's like, good, I'm going to hang out here in Alexandria. And then she gets word from some dude. He's like, yeah, Octavian's lying to you. He's bringing you back to Rome. So she promptly poisons herself and dies. And apparently that did piss off Octavian because he really did want to march her through the street. I mean, that. Can you imagine? Like he's like, I finally caught her. I get to march her through the street. Dang it, she's dead now. Anyway, so then she kills herself, and then that's kind of the end of the Ptolemaic Empire because by this time the Romans are just kind of like, why are we dealing with these Egyptians? Let's just subjugate them and be done with it. And then that's that. Right? That's the story of Cleopatra. Look at that, right on time. I don't know, and like I said, and if you're a history buff, fact checking me on this. I didn't have my sheet, so I can't remember all the different Ptolemies and the different, the different Ptolemies. Yeah, that was the story of Cleopatra, and I'm sure there's movies. There's lots of movies. I now wish I had watched one of those movies to know how far off the movies were from the truth, and I can totally see why they want to do like a docuseries on her because there's a whole lot of craziness in there. Like that is easy. That's like the whole thing is like Game of Thrones level craziness, but it's all there in the history because the Greeks just like to write everything down. And again, like I said, when you read some of it, you really got to think to yourself. So here, what do an overhead shot, Eddie? What do you think? So that's kind of where we're going with this. We got a ways to go. We'll do a few more rows for next week. So that's the story of Cleopatra, and like I said, I'm sure there's movies about it. But again, keep in mind that's Cleopatra the Seventh, because if you look at it, there's Cleopatra the First, Second, Third. Yeah, Cleopatra the Seventh. Bernice, like I said, I love the story of Bernice that she's like, I'm going to rule, and they're like, no, you need a husband, and she's like, okay, I'll get married, and then they like kill her. It's just so messed up, and it's even weirder. It's like you start reading it, and it's like Ptolemy, her other brother. And Ptolemy the Third, her other brother, like it's all brothers and sisters and cousins just like killing each other. I mean, like her dad was like forced into exile by her half sister. The whole thing is nuts. It makes me really appreciate modern society in that we can all just get along if we want to. We're not like playing these crazy games of power and intrigue. And I'm still trying to figure out, Eddie, why did everybody want Egypt so bad?
The pyramids are pretty cool.
Yeah, but I don't know that tourism was a thing back then.
There's a river.
Yeah, the Nile. I guess the Nile Delta for the food. Yeah, but because that's what's going on all along. They're like, we got these pyramids. We're trying to get tourism started, and Caesar's like, no, they got to come to the Colosseum. I don't want to compete with the pyramids. Anyway. I hope that was somewhat interesting. Like I said, it was a rabbit hole. Like I said, there's a whole other rabbit hole of Greeks versus Macedonians. That is crazy. So I was going to get into this a little bit. I can't even find it. I had the quote, but we get so wrapped up in like this real stupid stuff sometimes. Like we're seeing a lot of this right now, like the black versus white thing. Like the whole thing that restarted this was because Cleopatra wasn't black. And when you start getting into it, nobody cares. It doesn't mean anything. It's like something we just invented. Because, like, the Macedonians and the Greeks have been at each other's throats for, like, centuries. And you know what? They're all white dudes. It's not about black versus white. It's Macedonian versus Greek. It'd be more akin to, like, it would be like New Hampshire versus Maine. I mean, that's what some of this comes down to. It's not about, it's where were you born, not so much what you look like for a lot of this stuff. I've always said because, Eddie, you're like half Nicaraguan, right? And for me to pretend that you're some sort of gangster from LA because you're Latino.
I can pretend.
I mean, that's like the story. That's what's saying, like, oh, you're Latino. It's like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some cool culture with it. But to immediately say that because you're Latino, you're a gangbanger from LA, that's kind of messed up.
Yeah.
Or that you're some, like, Mexican landscaper because you're Latino. I mean, I'm stereotyping. I'm probably going to get into all sorts of trouble for this. But that's what I'm saying. Like, when we get wrapped up in all of this foolishness, it doesn't mean anything. Because you love people for who they are. It's not important, what they look like. I mean, I guess, redheads versus blondes, maybe. That's what I think it should get to the point where race is just like hair color. That's my theory on it. But then I get in trouble because, Anyway. Yes, you don't have to watch the docu-series now. That's correct, John, because you got it all here first from me. Yeah, the storyteller with the sewing machine. Anyway, tune in tonight at 8 o'clock on Facebook Live to catch our Facebook Live sale. Tune in next week. It should be a good time. Should be a great time because I'm going to have Michael up here. And when he called up, I'm like, hey, when was the last time you sewn? He said, it's been years. I'm like, fantastic. We're going to have a good time next week, too. So check us out on Facebook. Check us out on YouTube. Well, you're on YouTube, obviously. Buy stuff from the store, go online if you're from the other side of the world or other side of the United States and buy stuff from us, so that we can stay in business and keep doing this. Thanks for watching. Sew on and be excellent to each other.